Got half an hour to go before we wrap up the day. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Hey, I want to tell you about my friends at Waddell & Reed right here in Twin Falls. This is a company that has been handling money now for 80 years. It's going back to 1937. We'll talk about that in a moment. One of the oldest firms to offer mutual funds, and in fact, Waddell & Reed owns and manages 2 mutual fund families and invests by a conservative nature. Waddell & Reed, they know what they're doing. They take a more planning approach and a look at each piece of the puzzle for individual clients and help build proper expectations. At Waddell & Reed, they'll build a plan around your needs and goals, help you manage your money, and Waddell & Reed takes planning personally. I always like to note that any business that can say 80 years, a successful business in many cases runs 10 or 20, and then what happens is if the kids don't want to take it over, it gets sold and somebody else comes in and the like, or somebody retires and there's just nobody left to take over. But when you get to a certain point where you can start talking in decades, that's a sure sign of success. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Story today that I came across, and I wasn't going to, I'd like to talk a little bit more about some of the goings on in Washington because it's having the tremors coming out of Washington are spreading all over the country the way that government currently is operating. But I don't want to miss some of the other big cultural things and other news stories that are going on. And I got up to this one this morning, and this comes from a writer by the name of Claudia Lauer. Boy Scouts will allow transgender children into programs. And I saw some news coverage this morning, and I've heard some on the radio as well. It says, for more than 100 years, the Boy Scouts of America, along with schools, youth sports, and other youth organizations, have ultimately deferred to the information of an individual's birth certificate to determine eligibility for our single-gender programs. This is a statement from the Boy Scouts of America. However, that approach, the writer says, is no longer sufficient as communities and state laws are interpreting gender identity differently, and these laws vary widely from state to state. I did not have really a huge difference of opinion with the Boy Scouts of America when they decided that, that they could have scout leaders who were of a different persuasion. To me, it's not, look, somebody who wants to dedicate their life to service, I don't care if they're gay or straight, and people sometimes tend to equate that lifestyle with molesting children, which is, child molester is an entirely different thing. And I don't speak from personal experience, only to the degree that in my hometown, after I'd actually left scouting, but it was some of the younger lads in my hometown who were subject to this, back in the 1980s and 1990s, there was a scout leader in town by the name of Colin Stillman back in my hometown. And he ended up being arrested and charged and with a molesting of 180 boys over the period of about 20 years. And he did some serious prison time. They only actually got him, I think, on the one particular case, but that they only needed his one conviction of molesting one boy to send him away. That's a huge concern. You want these people screened. We need to know who they are, what they're like. But again, somebody who has an interest in children in that sense is different than someone else who has an interest in another grown male. I can make that distinction. But as I was reading this, the writer says the Boy Scouts said the enrollment decision goes into effect immediately. Here's the thing. Why don't we just call it the It Scouts? And then just, if you've got issues with this, call them the It Scouts and just have everybody who's a kid, call it the Kid Scouts or the Child Scouts or the Young Person's Brigade, whatever you want to call it. But if we're going to do this, then why even bother with Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts as definitions or differentiations? And between us, I don't believe that a kid who's 8 years old, who was born a girl but thinks she's a boy, has really reached the point where they can make a decision about these issues. And I actually think mom and dad, who generally are trying to make a political statement, they need to have their heads examined. And for the Boy Scouts to go along with a decision like this, just because, that's the way the wind is blowing, so that's what we'll do. You are enabling some people out there who need their heads examined is what you're enabling. And I don't blame parents now at this stage of the game for taking a long, hard look at this, stepping back because, my church sponsors a scout troop. How do you suppose my church, which teaches that definitely there are differences between biological males and biological females, I don't know how we're going to square this one away. So I guess maybe we'll just have to focus on Catholic youth groups. And how do they look at this over at the LDS Church where they have very similar views? I'm sorry, but this is a bridge too far. 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. We're at 20. More of your telephone calls coming up in just a few minutes on the program. We're down to the stretch run, but have to take a break. Stretch run of our program today. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Thank you for listening. If you're having trouble listening, though, I wanted to remind you of my friend Dr. Christine Pickup at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. She is offering a new hearing device, which is better than anything else on the market. It works directly with the brain to help you, be more discerning about the sounds that you're actually hearing. She's also offering a 2-week free trial. And if you need to know more, you can call today, Mount Harrison Audiology, schedule a fitting appointment as well. Telephone number, 312-0957. That's 312-0957. Dr. Pickup would like to remind you, you can open your world to better hearing. That at Mount Harrison Audiology. Thanks for joining us. It's 9:44, 22 I'll call it. Quick warm-up today. It's like a front's moving in, and we will see a lot of there's going to be a tremendous thaw over the next week to 10 days, but it won't necessarily be really fast. I was talking about this with Penny Main earlier, out in the main office, and which is named after her, of course. And we were talking about the snow that has fallen in where she lives out in the Burley area. And she said if we had a fast meltdown, if we had a day where it was 55, 60 degrees and maybe some rain on that, she would have a terrible flood at her house. And I think that concerns a lot of people. But it looks as if the daytime highs are going to be in the mid-30s to maybe low 40s over the next week to 10 days, which means overnight lows dropping down enough where that will slow down. It'll melt some during the day and then slow down, then melt some during the day and then slow down. And I can't think that that's a bad thing. I've been through some of these quick meltdowns when we've had big storms and never much cared for cold water. And I don't like flooding when it's warm out. I mean, why would I like it when the water's cold? I want to thank you for joining us. Telephone number, if you'd like to reach our program today, is 736-0300. That's 736-0300. I was talking about this situation with the Boy Scouts earlier. The liberals aren't done yet in this country. This is why all of this caterwauling's going on about President Trump and some of his decisions is because the liberals got its meat hooks into our culture, and they're not going to go quietly into that good night. And it's really everywhere as well. And here's a story I happened to see at Real Clear Politics, and this was actually, at Real Clear Science. Scientists criticize hottest year on record, claim as hype. And apparently, that right before he left office, President Obama was warning, the oceans are going to keep rising. You're losing me, and because of that, you've put a man in office. He's going to cause the entire world to flood, and it's all your fault. If you only had elected Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, we could have saved the planet, but now it's all too late for all of you. Well, this is from Stephen Koonin. He is the Undersecretary for Science, or was, in the Obama Department of Energy from 2009 to 2011. So you would think, fellow traveler, but he said, quote, the Obama administration relentlessly politicized science and it aggressively pushed a campaign about that politicized science, unquote. Koonin is a theoretical physicist at New York University. Now, I would think that means he's a pretty bright guy. I don't know a lot about theoretical physicists, but it probably was a little more complex than my broadcasting courses in college. It says he also blamed a happily complicit media for trumpeting the now-departed Obama administration's dubious claim. And complicit media is also in quotes. Also, NOAA fixed, that is the National Organization or for what? National Ocean, you know what I mean, right? National Ocean Atmospheric Administration or something along those lines. It means it's a scientific organization staffed by a lot of government bureaucrats, translated as liberals. Fixed the 2016 increase at what was it, 4/100ths of a degree Celsius. The British Met Office reported an even lower rise of 1/100th of a degree Celsius. The writer says both increases are well within the margin of error for such calculations, which would be significantly higher if there was real warming going on. A guy named Richard Lindzen, he's a meteorology professor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, said this, quote, "It's typical misleading nonsense," unquote. Then he went on to say, quote, "We're talking about less than 1/10 of a degree with an uncertainty of about 1/4 of a degree. Moreover, such small fluctuations, even if real, don't change the fact that the trend for the past 20 years has been much less than the models have predicted," unquote. And yet the liberals are using this data. They're trying to fudge it. You want to talk about fake news? They're taking data that doesn't really say anything and turning around and saying, "Oh, the sky is falling. We need to remove Donald Trump by any means necessary." And I add those last few words because I did my little pregame pep talk before the show today. I do it on Facebook every morning for a few minutes. I also have uploaded a video to our News Radio 1310 KLIX YouTube page. It's the same video, but my fear is that these angry libs who can't get their way, that they will try to remove Donald Trump by any means necessary. This is a serious threat to the President of the United States. He was legally elected. It's also a threat to the American people who voted for him. Because if they can pull this off and have some sort of Bolshevik revolution, they will do it. And then the rest of us are going to be in some serious, serious trouble. I don't know how we're going to satisfy their bloodlust, but we may have to strike at them before they strike at us. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Good morning again, Bill. All 73 of the United Nations climate models have proven to be wrong. And we all remember the East Anglican emails that were intercepted. So figures don't lie, but liars figure, because if you use the satellite data, we've actually cooled off in the last 15 years or so, about almost a degree. And, with the snow on the Egyptian pyramids in December and other things, they're using surface temperatures are totally inaccurate, and they've eliminated some of the coldest places on the planet. So that makes the averages come out higher. And every year is the hottest year, so I guess they keep taking away more of the colder areas. But it's all a big hoax, and it's all about the United Nations using Agenda 21 and the rest of that agenda to control everybody on the planet, but mainly to destroy the economy and anybody that really has any scientific background. There's over 30,000 U.S. scientists, and over 9,000 of those are PhDs. Not all of them are climate scientists, but are on record against man-caused global warming. Just remember, folks, CO2 is necessary for life. If we don't have CO2, we don't breathe and we don't eat anything. So keep that in mind.
Thank you much for the call. I have a friend of mine, and he's the counterpart to Chris Anderson here at the Herod Center in Twin Falls. And my friend is working at a science museum in Prestonburg, Kentucky. He is one of those 30-some-odd thousand scientists who've signed on and said this is all a bunch of bunk. I also have this. I wanted to mention this. This comes from, it's called the Snowtel. Current water levels, snow and water equivalent in Idaho. And I want to thank a listener in Jerome who sent this, or Jerome County who sent this over. This is not a dry year and it's not a warm year. At least we're not off to a fast start after looking at that particular map. It's 9:51. Bill Cowley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Just a quick note, I've been telling you about, and some of you obviously are now joining me in taking part in the Total Body Transformation. And that comes through the Total Body Transformation System, which promotes healthy weight loss and wellness. It is not a fad diet. And I've been telling you it was created by a company that's been in business more than 2 decades with an A-plus rating from the Better Business Bureau. Scientists from some of the leading universities across the country looked at this diet and said, yes, this is a diet you can do, and it will be a healthy diet for you. It won't harm you like some of these other fad diets do. And we wanted to point out as well that the Total Body Transformation System will help you burn 6 times more fat and lose 8 times more weight than normal results from diet and exercise alone. And I lost 60 pounds in under 4 months. The meal replacements, healthier than the food you normally eat. You can also have a healthy amount of calories. And I've been telling you, the cost of the meal replacements will be about the same as buying the groceries that you're replacing. The average participant will drop 22 pounds in just 60 days and lose 4 inches off the waist. And we wanted to point out, too, there's an unconditional full money-back guarantee. However, the man you need to contact, he's lost more than 50 pounds himself on the diet. That's Don Chandler. He's right here in Twin Falls. His telephone number, 208-731-3560. Don is at 208-731-3560. You know, you could be a lesser being, but more of a being if you actually go through a diet like this. We have a telephone caller with us. Caller, you're up next on KLIX. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. Thank you for this show you do.
Thank
Hey,
you.
as long as we're on the subject of global warming, I have a history question for some of those proponents of, American capitalism are going to destroy the world by heating it up with carbon dioxide. Like nearly 1,000 years ago, the people of Scandinavia, the Vikings, they lived in Iceland, Greenland, and eastern seaboard of the United States. I don't know how familiar a lot of our readers are with the geography of the world, but Greenland right now is an ice sheet from one end to the other, with a little bit of bare black rock showing around the edges. You know what the Vikings were doing there almost 1,000 years ago?
Oh, they were farming.
Yeah, and they actually had vineyards and they were making wine. I'm curious what capitalist-inspired carbon-spewing industrial base is responsible for that temperature, eh?
And I want to thank you for the call. Well, we've had fluctuations in climate throughout human history. And you've had minor ones. You had the Little Ice Age for 500 years, from the middle of the 1300s through the middle of the 1800s. So you've got warm periods and cool periods. You get ice ages and you get warm-ups. And we're a little late for the next ice age, which I think is a good thing if the warming continues and prevents that, because an ice age would be far worse for humanity than what we're currently going through. 9:55, Bill Colley with you on Top Story. I got to share one thing before we wrap up the program today, talking about liberals being out of control. I meet a lot of people who are refugees here in Idaho, not from overseas, but from places like Washington State, California, Oregon. This is Jay Inslee, the radical liberal governor of Washington State, making threats yesterday about how he's going to sue Donald Trump over Trump's executive order on refugee resettlement and immigration.
Its intent is to open the gates to Christian refugees and to slam the gates closed on those who follow the religion of Islam. This is un-American. It is wrong. An attack on any faith is an attack on all faiths.
Oh, those evil Christians will come here. Actually, it's a ban, and he's lying again, and media is just helping him with a lie. The fact of the matter is, nobody of any religion right now can come from those 7 countries on that list. But what's his problem with Christians? Well, in his state, they wouldn't make a floral arrangement for a same-sex wedding. So we've got wait until he sees what the Muslim businesses do when they get those requests. Yeah, it could be pretty nasty. We have a caller with us. You're up next. You're on the air on KLIX.
Hey, Bill, I was just going to say that if you think these left-wingers are going to unseat this president, man, I want to tell you, they're not, because we are not going to let them, for one thing. And if they think the military's on their side, man, they are out to lunch. And I'll tell you, we are going to take this country back. I mean, come hell or high water.
And I thank you for the call. I hope that's true. The video that I did, and as I said, It's at my Facebook page, but I also have a copy of it that I posted to our YouTube page, and I'll post it to our website this morning as well in a few minutes when I get a chance. But it discusses this. There were people who said that we were in a pre-revolutionary moment before the election. Now, I don't know what. Sometimes people say, well, I don't want to get involved. We'll talk tough, but when push comes to shove, the old line is sunshine patriots. But there are times in history. You have a lot of failed revolutions that actually give you a good example. Ireland, 1916. Tactically, they lost, but it led to Irish independence, at least in most of the country. And you have other revolutions that take place, and you wonder what caused that. Sometimes when you think there should have been a revolution, you wonder how come nobody. There are a lot of different factors that come into all of this. There may be a lot of Americans, and I think they're actually all on the left, who talk tough right now, but if push came to shove, and I was talking to my friend Lieutenant Colonel Steve Heil yesterday on the telephone, and he's an Ohio native, and I said, Kent State happened. The anti-war movement just died. And by the way, media still says, oh, America was horrified. Actually, 9 out of 10 Americans surveyed in the weeks following says, good for the National Guard. But, it was playtime for a lot of demonstrators. And then after the shooting, all of a sudden, a lot of them just said, I think I'm going to go back to class. God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll be back tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Rush Limbaugh's up next following Fox News.